Hello and welcome to the HistoryNetwork.org podcast. As ever, I'd like to put out a small plea to all of you to just take a look at patreon.com/the History Network and consider becoming a patron of the podcast. We are so grateful to those of you who do that. If you didn't know, the way Patreon works is that you can pledge as little as $1 an episode, I believe, and you only pay if we actually produce content. You don't just pay per month whether we produce anything or not. So please do consider just popping along to patreon.com and becoming a patron of the podcast. Thank you. The HistoryNetwork.org podcast, season 33, episode 3, Epaminondas of Thebes, part 1. This episode was written by Murray Darm. Murray is an ancient and medieval military historian from New Zealand. Living in Australia, he has written more than 100 articles on various aspects of ancient and medieval military history, as well as other historical topics from all periods, ranging from the history of opera to the runic alphabet and recipients of the Victoria Cross. He is the author of Macedonian Phalangite versus Persian Warrior, Athenian Hoplite versus Spartan Hoplite, and Leuctra 371 BC, all from Osprey Publishing. He is a regular contributor here as well as on the Ancient Warfare podcast. Epaminondas of Thebes is one of the greatest and most revolutionary commanders in military history, destroying the might of Sparta in a single day at the Battle of Leuctra in 371 BC. At that battle, Epaminondas led the outnumbered Theban phalanx to an overwhelming victory over an army of feared Spartan hoplites. Theban victory that day forever changed the political map of Greece. In order to achieve such a stunning victory, Epaminondas created a military revolution which would indelibly change warfare. His tactics and strategies are studied and implemented to this day, yet Epaminondas himself remains a figure of some mystery and controversy, and not one as well known as he should be. In the aftermath of their victory in the Peloponnesian War against Athens, fought between 431 and 404 BC, Sparta sought to impose her will on all of Greece. This included several states in the plains of Boeotia, an area which the city of Thebes considered itself the natural leader of. And so, even though Thebes had supported Sparta against Athens, she now switched her support to Athens. Thebes led an anti-Spartan coalition of cities which was able to gain some success against Sparta in the Corinthian War, fought 395 to 387 BC. With the Peace of 387, known as the King's Peace because it was underwritten by the Persian king Artaxerxes II. However, all Greek states were theoretically to remain autonomous. However, the Persians also backed the authority of Sparta and established them as the dominant force in Greece, able to impose their will on all who would resist. Buoyed by this foreign support, Sparta proceeded to attack the supposedly autonomous city-states of Greece under the pretext that they threatened peace. In 383, a coup in Thebes itself led to a pro-Spartan oligarchy and Spartan garrison being installed. In 379, an anti-Spartan coup led by a young commander named Pelopidas overthrew the pro-Spartan oligarchy at Thebes and re-established the city as the dominant force in Boeotia. Thebes then consolidated power in the region, creating the Boeotian League, a coalition of cities with Thebes at their head. Thebes also established themselves as the champions of a free Greece against the tyranny of Sparta. Sparta soon moved to put an end to those ambitions. Despite negotiations in 371, peace could not be reached, and the Spartan king, Cleombrotus, marched at the head of a Spartan and Peloponnesian army to put an end to Thebes' resistance. The figure of Epaminondas is shrouded in mystery despite his importance and a rich anecdotal tradition regarding his outlook on life. His place in Thebes' return to freedom and ascendancy is also difficult to pinpoint. although there is no question it was vital. This is partially down to a problem with our sources. The life of Epaminondas, written by Plutarch, does not survive, and several other writers, especially Xenophon, whose history, the Hellenica, is essential for understanding the period, show a distinctly anti-Theban bias. Several aspects of Epaminondas' life are tied up with academic debates, which remain unsettled. Yet we do know that he was vitally important to Theban politics, warfare and history in the period 371-362, and a vast array of fragmentary and anecdotal accounts reinforce this importance. We also have traces of him in other sources which do survive, such as Plutarch's Lives of Pelopidas and Agesilaus II, and in Cornelius Nepos' book of Great Generals of Foreign Nations. Since Epaminondas' death essentially heralded the end of Theban dominance, very little Theban evidence survives. Alexander the Great would raze Thebes to the ground 30 years later, which probably destroyed yet more evidence. Several important literary sources also do not survive, which hampers us yet further. No physical description of him survives, but we do know, however, that Epaminondas was impoverished, despite being from an old aristocratic family. He embraced his straitened circumstances and made them a part of his philosophy and outlook on life. Indeed, he was regarded as a military philosopher, studying the lyre, singing and dance, all skills in which he saw a military application. He remained unmarried so that he could concentrate on studying those things which brought protection and glory to Thebes. Epaminondas was one of the liberators who overthrew the pro-Spartan government at Thebes, although he is not named by Xenophon. Xenophon does not name Pelopidas either, although he was the ringleader of the uprising against Sparta. This highlights the problem of Xenophon as a source, someone who otherwise seems like a reliable source for the period. His version of Theban history, however, can be seriously questioned, and his accounts of Epaminondas, Pelopidas, and the defeat of Sparta are unreliable. Xenophon was pro-Spartan in his writings, and that seems to have seriously affected his judgment on Theban history. Epaminondas was the leader of the Theban peace delegation at Sparta in 371, and then a Boeotarch, one of the elected leaders of the Boeotian League. He led during the Leuctra campaign, and it is clear that he was already respected as a leader and speaker. We are told that he was the best speaker in Thebes, and using our widespread sources we are able to piece together a picture. His father Polymnis was from an honourable Theban family, although one of few means. Nonetheless, Epaminondas was educated as well as any other Theban. We know that he never took advantage of his more wealthy friends, such as Pelopidas, refusing their offers of financial help. He was also impervious to attempted bribes made by various cities and individuals. He learnt to play the lyre, to sing and dance, and studied athletics and wrestling. All of these, we are told, he saw could have a military application. Cornelius Nepos tells us that he thought agility would be useful in warfare rather than just physical strength. There are later anecdotes of this, encouraging the Theban hoplites to train in wrestling. Nepos lists his qualities as a man prudent, serious, a lover of the truth, self-controlled, kindly. Epaminondas also studied philosophy and is rated by several authors as a military philosopher with only one rival, Socrates of Athens. There are several parallels between Epaminondas and Socrates which are worth noting, such as their poverty and habit of getting lost in thought while mulling over some thorny problem. Perhaps the earliest event for which we have an account of Epaminondas' life is his saving the life of his colleague and friend Pelopidas at Mantinea in 385. This too parallels Socrates saving Alcibiades' life at the Battle of Potidaea. Plutarch tells us that Epaminondas defended his friend's body even though he thought Pelopidas was already dead. This bonded the two together for life. The two became inseparable friends from that point, and their combined efforts and skills led Thebes to greatness. Pelopidas was not only prominent in the overthrow of Spartan power, but also the first commander of the elite Theban hoplite force, the Heros Lochos, or Sacred Band. This force comprised of 300 Theban hoplites paid by the state to dedicate themselves to war, just as their Spartan adversaries were. They were probably established in the aftermath of the liberation. One tradition names Epaminondas as the founder of this unit, although others name one of the other conspirators against Spartan power, Gorgidas. We need to be wary that Epaminondas' later importance may mean that he was given credit for all manner of events to which his connection may have been small. The Sacred Band is itself controversial, since several writers name the unit as comprising 150 pairs of homosexual lovers who would fight furiously for each other. Other writers do not mention them as lovers, and Xenophon refuses to name the unit at all. The Secret Band were prominent in several of Thebes' most important battles, including Tegea in 375, Leuctra in 371, and Mantinea in 362. They died to the last man facing the forces of Philip II of Macedon at Chaeronea in 338. Leuctra is a battle which is one of the most discussed in our ancient sources. We have 4 lengthy accounts of the battle, more than for any other important ancient battle. Unfortunately, among these 4 accounts there is confusion and disagreement, and so working out what actually happened and why our sources disagree is complicated. There are also a plethora of minor and anecdotal accounts which can add to our picture of the battle. The differences in the accounts are such that they cannot be reconciled without disregarding one or the other of them, and so we must decide which version we trust more. Xenophon paints a reasonable picture of the battle, but one which gives no credit to the Thebans or Epaminondas, and he contradicts the picture from our other sources. Xenophon paints a picture of how the Spartans lost the battle, but not one of how the Thebans won, and it was a battle that the Thebans distinctly won, especially because of Epaminondas' leadership and vision. Disregarding Xenophon, all the other surviving sources preserve a cohesive picture of the battle and Epaminondas' role in it. Epaminondas had been elected Boeotarch for the campaign. These were the elected leaders of the Boeotian League, of which Thebes was head. There were 11 Boeotarchs, 4 came from Thebes itself, and the others from the remainder of cities in the League. Pausanias's and Diodorus's accounts, which make it clear that Epaminondas was regarded as the senior Theban leader and overall commander, and the tradition which attached itself to Epaminondas, crediting him with responsibility of the victory, should be trusted. What is more, it is clear that Epaminondas' plan of battle was deliberate and premeditated, not some accident of happenstance. His reputation as a military genius should never be in doubt. On the field at Leuctra, Epaminondas drew up the Boeotian line, with the Thebans themselves on the left, facing the Spartan king Cleombrotus, who was, as was traditional, stationed on the Spartan right. This deployment was unusual. Usually ancient Greek armies placed their best troops and most important commander on the right. This meant that the strongest forces never fought each other, but at the Battle of Leuctra, Epaminondas deliberately deployed his troops on the left so that they could face their Spartan opponents. Several aspects of Epaminondas' deployment and use of the Theban army at Leuctra are noteworthy even today. Firstly, his drawing up of the Theban phalanx on the left of his battle line to face the strongest troops of his opponent. The second aspect of his tactics were that he drew up his forces in a deep formation, 50 shields deep according to Xenophon. The Spartans who opposed this force were only 12 ranks deep, and so could not hope to hold an opposition which so much outnumbered them in terms of mass. His tactics are the epitome of the use of mass and the economy of force, still relevant modern military considerations. The Theban formation was probably led by the Sacred Band, the 300 highly trained Theban hoplites who rivalled their Spartan opponents. The third remarkable part of Epaminondas's battle plan was to draw up the remainder of his army, which may have been of dubious loyalty, in an echelon formation extending diagonally away from the Theban contingent. This meant that the remainder of the Spartan army could not come into contact with the enemy. Spartan training and traditions could not protect them from the Theban onslaught and near annihilation. Numbers at the battle differ in all accounts, but the consensus has come to 7,000 Boeotian hoplites, because 7 Boeotarchs were present, and 700 cavalry versus 10,000 Peloponnesians, including 700 Spartans and 1,000 cavalry. Plutarch has 2,000 Spartans present, 2/3 of the total Spartan manpower available. Other sources give a ratio of 6-1 in favour of Sparta to increase the impressive nature of the Theban victory. The 300 members of the Theban secret band with their commander Pelopidas were also stationed on the left, possibly as a front line, although their exact deployment has evaded scholars. Pelopidas led the charge and won a great victory in the battle, even though he was not a Boeotarch. The remainder of the Boeotian line, drawn up obliquely on the left, was not required to fully engage with the corresponding part of the enemy phalanx. Diodorus tells us that the remainder actually withdrew, as per Epaminondas's instructions, as the Spartan army advanced. As the Theban left advanced towards Cleombrotus, therefore, the remainder of the Boeotian line would not be engaged. The battle would be decided by the densely packed Theban phalanx's clash with the Spartan right, elite versus elite. This is indeed what happened. The Theban phalanx, led by the Sacred Band, smashed into the Spartan right, and after a time felled Cleombrotus and much of his Spartiate bodyguard. After this, the Peloponnesian line broke and fled from the field, something we are told Spartans had never done before. Plutarch and Xenophon tell us that 1,000 Spartans fell in the battle, a huge blow to Spartan manpower, and one from which they could not recover. A Spartan, trained for warfare from childhood, and losing that many men in a single engagement, crippled the city as a military force. Other accounts have larger losses, as high as 4,000 Peloponnesian dead. Losses on the Theban side range from only 47 men to 300. Summaries of the battle tell that such an event and its significance had never been seen before. Whilst it is true that Sparta had been defeated in battle before, she had never lost such a significant proportion of her manpower in one battle. What is more, the Spartans had broken and run, something that had never been recorded before, and which showed that the Spartans were just as fallible as ordinary men. The damage to Spartan reputation was perhaps more damaging than to its manpower. Sparta was not destroyed, however, and still represented a tyrannical presence, according to freedom-loving Thebans in Greece. Epaminondas's next actions showed how far-reaching his plan was, the complete overthrow of Spartan power. And we will get to part 2 and the complete overthrow of Spartan power by Epaminondas in the next episode in a couple of weeks' time. Thanks, Murray, for writing that episode for us. If you would like to write an episode for us and have a subject in mind, then just drop us a line, info@thehistorynetwork.org for that. And once again, just a small appeal to you to go to patreon.com/thehistorynetwork and just sign up and become a patron of the podcast. We really do appreciate very much all our patrons. Thank you. Thanks again for listening. You've been listening to the historynetwork.org podcast, written by Murray Darm, read by Nick Barker.